In this video, I'm going to be sharing with all of you my top 5 role-playing game mechanics, what RPGs they come from, and what these rules or mechanics offer in this type of role-playing game. Before we get started, I want to remind you that I have some links below. I design games and you can check them out at the link paperdicegames.com below, and I have a Patreon page down there as well that you can check out. So, my top 5 mechanics from role-playing games that I absolutely love, here they are. Number 5 for me is what I would call wild magic. And this is the idea that in the game you're playing, magic is unpredictable, it's wild, and it's dangerous. And if things go wrong, there's going to be a random table that you roll on to determine what random magical side effect occurs when you try and cast magic. Now, a lot of games use this type of thing in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. They have a class that uses this, and I think it's Sorcerer. I believe that's it. But there's a lot of other games that use this as well. In Dungeon Crawl Classics, they use this. If you do something wrong when casting magic, there's a I forget what it's called, but there's a table that you can roll on to see what goes wrong. In the game Forbidden Lands, they have a table for you to roll on if you cast magic wrong. And there's some games where this is how all magic works, you know, and this is like the thing about magic in that world. And for some reason, this idea of wild magic or unpredictable magic just kind of tickles me in a fun way, I guess. It's so fun for me to be a magic caster, some sort of spell caster in these games, and something goes wrong, and all of a sudden, I don't know what's going to happen next with the magic I just cast. I just know that it's going to be fun and interesting. So that's my number 5 mechanic that I absolutely love from role-playing games. That is wild magic. My number 4 mechanic that I love from role-playing games is something that you don't see very often, and it's the idea of replayability. There's a game that I have been playing, a solo game for a while, called Ghost of Lion Castle. I have a few other videos on it. And in this game, you are a spellcaster exploring a castle, but you're expected to die because the journal that you're recording all your experiences in will magically appear at a nearby tavern, ready for the next character, your next character who's ready to go in and check out the castle. And I think that idea of replayability and kind of a roguelike system is very, very cool. But there's one other module that I'm aware of that uses this replayability mechanic. And that is I6 Ravenloft. There's a really fun idea in this old school module with Ravenloft, and I've not checked out the new incarnations like the Curse of Strahd to see if it's in there as well. But there's a page in here called the Fortunes of Ravenloft. There we go, that's what it looks like. And what this page does is it basically allows you to replay this module, but change some of the most important parts so that as you replay, you don't know where everything is and what's going on right away. So the 3 main things that can change are, number 1, the Fortunes of Ravenloft, the places. So the places where the main treasure is going to be hidden will change based on where you roll or what cards you draw from the deck, because this is so kind of like a fortune-telling deck. The places will change based on what cards you draw. Another one of these is the how the game works. There's a few mechanical changes based on the suit of cards that you draw, and that will determine whether or not the characters get extra armor class but deal less damage, or vice versa, or something like that. And probably the most important one here is the idea of Strahd's goals. Based on the type of card that you draw, Strahd's goals, who's the vampire in Ravenloft, will actually change so that the vampire will be acting differently every single time you play. And I think this idea is really, really cool. Sorry. I decided I was going to put that down there. But I think this idea is really, really cool because so often campaigns and RPGs have an undetermined length where you sit down and start a campaign and it's just going to end whenever. But I think the idea is really cool that there's a module where you know that, hey, this is going to be 3 to 5 sessions. We're going to sit down and play through. And if we like it, we can do it again because the whole module can be changed out based on these replayability mechanics. So I think that's very, very cool. You don't see it that often, but I think I'd like to see that a little bit more. I'd like to see modules that are like mini campaigns where you can do it in 3 sessions, but if you want to redo it, there's enough changes that can be made to make it fun again. So that's number 4 for me, is replayability mechanics. Number 3 is something that's unique to one system. I haven't seen anything like this before, and it is the Vow system in Ironsworn and Starforged, which my copy should be getting here. My physical copy should be getting here sometime in the next month or 2, which I'm excited about. So this is a solo role-playing game. And one of the toughest things about solo role-playing is trying to figure out what your character is going to be doing. You don't have a dungeon master who's dropping plot hooks in front of you. You don't have other players to kind of pick up the motivation and determine where the party's going to go. You're kind of on your own to fill all of the different answers that come up during a regular role-playing game session. And Ironsworn came up with a really, really cool solution to this problem, where they took the idea of character motivation and they built rules around it. And they called it a vow, or swearing an iron vow. And the idea is you, as the player, come up with some sort of quest or some sort of promise that your character is going to keep. And then there's mechanics that help support this. And from that point on, your character is no longer wandering aimlessly in the wilderness. Your character has a purpose and has a plan, and each step you take along that journey, you make mechanical progress towards this purpose, towards this vow, and eventually you'll have the chance to see if you can accomplish or complete this vow. And it's a really cool system. If you're a solo role player and you haven't checked out Ironsworn, I suggest you do it. At the very least, just because of this mechanic, because this can completely change how you do solo role-playing. And I think it's a very, very strong mechanic, and that's often why, for new solo role players, Ironsworn is one of the first things suggested, because this lays down a path for solo role players, for their character to follow, that's mechanically supported and very, very cool. So that's my number 3, is Vows and Oaths from Ironsworn. My number 2 here is something called the Mighty Deeds Die from Dungeon Crawl Classics. So here is my Dungeon Crawl Classics book, and I have it open to the Warrior page. And I'm just going to read 1 or 2 sentences about the Mighty Deeds Die. The mechanic for Mighty Deeds of Arms was designed to encourage exciting stunts by ambitious warriors in the tradition of literary heroes. The goal was to create a rule system that encouraged situation-specific freedom without creating a lot of cumbersome rules. Now, this is one of my biggest annoyances with 5th edition, is that when players play 5th edition, they play their character sheet rather than their character, as a keen YouTuber commented in a recent video of mine. And they don't really pay as much attention to their surroundings or anything like that. Rather, they're looking at their character sheet and trying to figure out, okay, what can I do next based on these few actions or abilities that my character has. Dungeon Crawl Classics attacks this with a really cool system called the Mighty Deeds Die, where if you play a warrior, you can be as creative as you want, and you can pick, any amount of combat feats or stunts or ideas and use them. And those cool creative ideas are wrapped up in a single simple mechanic to determine whether or not you're successful and how successful you are. So it gives a few examples of what you can do with this mechanic, but really the limit is just your imagination. When fighting opponents on a staircase, the character uses a sword to stab an opponent and then lever them over the edge of the staircase. So, you can kind of knock them over that way. Or when fighting a flying skull that was out of melee reach, a character leaped from the back of an ally onto the flying skull, or close to the flying skull so that they could hit. So kind of like that boost thing. So these are, and there's a whole bunch more of examples it gives, but the idea is that combat in Dungeon Crawl Classics, they wanted to find a way to make it so you could really do whatever you wanted, be creative, and not just, say the name of a move, roll some dice, and figure out what happens. They really wanted it to be more narrative and exciting. And this Mighty Deeds Die is such a cool way to do it. And I highly suggest, if you have not played Dungeon Crawl Classics, to do so, because this Mighty Deeds Die is very, very cool. That is my number 2 mechanic that I absolutely love from role-playing games. It is the Mighty Deeds Die from Dungeon Crawl Classics. Now, before I get to my number 1, I want to state that there's quite a few more that were on my short list for these, and right now these are probably my top 5, but I could see these changing in or out based on what game I'm playing or where my mood happens to lie. And I know you are probably thinking of some of your favorite and unique mechanics that you play in role-playing games. So please, in the comments below, let me know what you think some of your favorite mechanics are. And I'd love to, share some of those so that other people can get a sense of the scope of amazing games and mechanics there are in role-playing games. So here is my number 1 mechanic in role-playing games that I absolutely love, and it is the character creation system in Traveler. Now, when you create a character in Dungeons & Dragons and most other role-playing games, the idea is that you're rolling dice, you're making decisions, and you're basically figuring out, okay, who is my character, and maybe, here's some personality or maybe a little bit of a background about my character. But Traveler takes that idea. You still roll some basic dice for some basic attributes, but they take the background and the skills and they ramp it up to 11. What they do is when you play Traveler and create a character, you play a mini game that simulates the history of your character from the time they turn, I think it's 16, but it could be 20, I can't remember, or 18, something like that. From the time they turn at a certain age, and then you simulate the history as they kind of make their way through the job market, through different careers, trying to figure out what they can do to survive in the world. And every 4 years, you get a chance to see if your character succeeds in their station, whether or not they get hurt. That gives you a few little hooks about what's actually happening. You get a chance to connect with other characters or locations in the universe. And then you get a chance to decide what you want to do next. It's called mustering out. Do you want to muster out and actually start your character from the game here? Or do you want to keep on going within your career and see how long you can last, or even try a new career? It's a very, very cool system, and it uses a really fun tension, kind of like a push your luck game, where the further along your character continues, either in their career or a new career, the older your character gets. And the older your character gets, the more chance they have at getting injured in one of their careers, or just being old in the game and suffering some sort of physical setback. And yes, it is true, it is possible to die during character creation in Traveler, but that's an important part of the game, because if that threat was not there, then the tension of this push your luck mechanism wouldn't exist. And it would be for a min-maxer or somebody who wanted a really strong character, there would be no downsides to pushing a character into the 50, 60, 70-year-old range. But because character death and other character harm is a possibility, some people don't like that and stop in their late 20s. Some people kind of flirt with that level and go into their 30s or 40s. And some people say, hey, you know what? I don't really care. Bring it on. Let's see what happens. And take their character into the 50s and 60s as far as age goes, just during character creation. So I have a few examples here. I have my Traveler rulebook up here. And I have the Entertainer page open here. The other cool thing about character creation is they really have a lot of different types of careers and professions that you can use to build a history for your character. And when you think about a lot of science fiction stories that Traveler and other systems are trying to emulate, a lot of science fiction stories, that's one of the key features of characters, is they're here on a ship in this moment, usually as a trader or a doctor or something like that, but they have a history, and that history is slowly uncovered as the story unravels and tells itself, because hey, why did that pastor know how to use a gun? Well, that's a big question mark in a very well-known series that maybe wasn't never answered. But those are the fun types of things that can happen when you build a history like this, is because you all of a sudden have this history and you have these skills, and those will come up from time to time in the game, and you get these really fun story moments. So anyways, this is the Entertainer section. If your character decides to become an entertainer, you get to roll for some, and you're able to become an entertainer, you get to roll for some skills and training for that particular part of their life. And then you determine whether or not you're able to continue working as an entertainer, or if you fail that advancement and you are kind of kicked out of that, and your career ends as an entertainer and you have to choose something new. So, excuse me, wow. One of the things that can happen is mishaps. Mishaps are the negative things that could potentially harm your character. And again, the longer you stay in careers, the more often this could happen. And one of these is really important. If you roll a 3, it could, the result is public opinion turns on you and you reduce your social standing by 1. That's obviously very important in a game where you're traveling from world to world. If you have a high social standing, you get more stuff, I guess, kind of. You get more benefits depending on where you go. One of the other cool things that happens every time you choose a career is an event can happen, and these can range from very, very good to very, very bad. I will read one of these results here. If you get a 10 on the events, it says one of your pieces of art is stolen and the investigation brings you into the criminal underworld. gain one of these skills, and then it lists a few skills. And so within each of these professions and you're gaining skills, it also includes story hooks, not story hicks, story hooks. And so you have the opportunity now when you get results like this to say, oh, okay, at one point I was actually a part of the criminal underworld. I have the skill to show for it, but from a story perspective, that might come back and be a part of the story. And maybe that's something you keep secret with your character, and you kind of keep that close to the chest and then pull that out in one session when you're dealing with criminals, and it can be a really fun story moment. So I could go on and on about the Traveler character creation method. I still sometimes just create characters because it's so fun, but I wanted to share that with all of you as my #1 favorite role-playing game mechanic, the Traveler character creation method. So that's the video. That's all I have to talk about are my top 5 RPG mechanics, things I really love about these types of games. I love the idea of wild magic. I wish we could see more role-playing game replayability mechanics. I think that'd be very cool. I love the vows and oaths you get to do in Ironsworn. I like the Mighty Deeds die in DCC and how it incentivizes creative combat. And then finally, character creation in Traveler is still the #1 way to create characters for me. So please tell me the different mechanics you love in your RPGs. I'd love to read about them in the comments. And then finally, if you want to check out the games I design, you can do so at the link below, paperdicegames.com, as well as my Patreon page. All that stuff is there. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.